In this chapter, we will cover concepts such as business cycle, unemployment, and inflation. And the chapter will set the stage for the analytical presentation of the latest chapters. So the content to cover during this lecture is again business cycle. What is a business cycle? Unemployment, inflation, redistribution effect of inflation, and the impact of inflation on or unemployment on the output. So what is business cycle? So business cycle is defined as the alternating increases and decreases in economic activity over time. And business cycle consists of 4 different phases. Well, we had a peak, and the peak is where business activity reaches a temporary maximum output. And here you have a full employment, and the output produced is at a maximum. Then we have the next phase, which is a recession. And recession is the decline in total output, ultimately the income, and you will see the employment also decline, as well as the trade. And this phase lasts about 6 months or more. Right. And sometimes we refer to recession as economic contraction. And then the next phase is the truth. And the truth is the pattern of the recession. What I mean by that is when the economic output decrease all the way to the maximum level, right? When we all at the bottom. And after that, you will see a period of expansion when output and employment are recovering from the recession. And you will see that expanding toward full employment. So the next slide going to show you the visual of the business cycle. Right? So the figure show business cycle, you will see the recession. You go all the way to the bottom, which is the trough, and you're gonna see the expansion. And we're gonna expand all the way to get to the maximum, which is a peak. And after that, you see again the recession. So if you look at it in the short run, you see that there's a frictional aspect of it. But in the long run, you can realize that yes, the economy is growing, but it's not growing at that linear pace. There's all those ups and downs, all those fluctuations. The National Bureau of Economic Research and now for-profit economic research organization release this information. And the agency, the Bureau, is have a business cycle dating committee. That job is to declare the start and the end of recession in the United States. So they declare the last recession declared in 2007, right? So they officially it started in December 2007 and end June 2009. And this table here show you all the recession we went through since 1950 and the duration and the impact on the output. So the long-run economic growth in the United States, like we saw in the previous figure, have been interrupted by a period of instability. You will see all those ups and downs, right? So you can see that the economy shock, which is when unexpected happen to the economy, especially when the prices are inflexible on the market, right? The economy response that you will see in the economy is a decrease in output and employment, right? So what are the causes of the shock that we see in the economy and that create those fluctuation in the economy? And the following shocks over here: political event, financial instability, right, and irregular innovation, productivity changes, and monetary factor. All these factors over here can cause business cycle. A major innovation, right, it may trigger new investment in the economy or consumption spending, and that can create unexpected. Right? When that happens, you can see that unexpected in the economy. Change in productivity, right, may be related to also create that change in the economy. Anything that is unexpected, right? Unexpected change in resource, right? Unexpected change in the rate of technology can affect productivity, right? And as a monetary factor here, if the monetary authority print more money than what economy needed, right? If they print more money than what economy needed, the consequence may be inflationary boom can happen to the economy. And also printing less money than what economy needed also can trigger the decline in the output. So had to print the exact amount of money that the economy needed to operate efficiently. And that is the role of, in our country, that's the role of the Federal Reserve to be able to monitor those. A cyclical impact. Most economists agree that the level of aggregated spending is very important, right? Especially when we have a change in the spending on a capital good, consumer durable, all those things. So when a business cycle or a recession happen in a particular economy, you will see that the impact is vary based on the type of business. The commodity that you can postpone the purchase of, those probably, those industries will be more impacted or be more affected than something you cannot go without, right? So the durable, the non-durable consumer good are affected less because you cannot postpone the purchase of those type of service and good. But the durable consumer good and consumer durable, those things like a refrigerator, your washer and dryer, right? You can postpone the purchase of those. Say, well, I can repair the existing one while I wait until the economy recover, right? So you can kind of, you have that flexibility to postpone the purchase of those goods. So now that we cover the first concept, which is a business cycle, we define the business cycle. Let's look at the unemployment. What type of unemployment? So the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is an agency of the Department of Labor, right? It's in charge to release the unemployment figure. And how they get to the number is through a random survey sent to 60,000 households nationwide. And they collect the information from those who survey, right? They interview by phone, they go to the house or using a laptop, and people are in the survey for 4 months out of 8. They get back in for another 4 months, and then out for good. And that helps those statisticians to collect the information that roll it into the calculation of the unemployment. So if you look at the figure here, we categorize the population in 3 different groups, I would say, right? So the first group, right, this area consists of people under the age of 16, or anyone in any federal or legal institution, right? People under the age of 16 are expected to be in school, right? Obviously, if you are in any institution such as nursing home, prison, you cannot represent yourself to the labor market. So this category of people are in this group that we call group 1 here. So now we move to the group 2. And the group 2 here consists of what we call the labor force, right? That is the example of an individual who the group 2, group 2 over here is not in the labor force, right? And not in the labor force, the individual, right, that or who are not working. So here we have the full-time student, right? Full-time, they stay home or parent, the retirees, they consist not in the labor force, they are not searching, they are not willing to work. So they are excluded, right? Not in the labor force. And the last group, which I was referring to earlier, is a labor force, which is the employed and the unemployed. And this group over here are the 60 years old and over who are willing and able to work and actively seeking work. When we say the federal definition, actively seeking work, individual who have demonstrated job search within the last 4 weeks, actively searching for work. And the group 3 represent the labor force. So the unemployed, and to be qualified as an employee, you have to be in the labor force, right? So yeah, unemployment rate is defined as the percentage, right, of the labor force, the percentage of this labor force, right? It's a percentage of this labor force over here that is not employed and actively seeking for work but cannot find work, right? That's the unemployed. So the calculation is going to be the number of unemployed divided by the total labor force, which is include employed and unemployed, and multiply by 100, because it's expressed in percentage, right? And the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, round the number to 1 decimal point. There's a 2 factor cause official unemployment number to be understated. And those are the critics of criticism of the unemployment. And one of them is the part-time worker. are counted as employed. So if your hour decrease, not because of you want to decrease your hour because of business downsize, when they do collect the information and release the unemployment rate, you are be counted as employed, even though your hours were reduced and you will lack more hours. Be a full-time, but you cannot be a full-time, not because of you don't want to. You are here counted as employed. The second one is the discouraged worker, right? The discouraged worker, people who, for instance, send a few resumes out, and for the last 4 weeks, they didn't send anything out because nobody called them. They didn't receive a call they expected. If they reduce the search for work and they didn't send it, or they are now more active in searching for work, they are now counted toward the labor force. To that point, they are not included in the calculation of unemployment. Now let's look at the type of unemployment. So we have the frictional unemployment, and the frictional unemployment is considered as somehow desirable for the economy, because that indicates that there's a mobility as people change or seek for another job, right? Searching for a job or waiting to take a different, a more productive job. And frictional unemployment is usually a short-run type of unemployment. Second, we have a structural unemployment. And structural unemployment happens when certain skills in the labor force become obsolete, or there's a geographic distribution of the job change, right? And this structural unemployment, it can be a long-term type of unemployment. And we have the last category, which is cyclical unemployment. And cyclical unemployment is caused by extreme the decline. It's caused by the decline in the output, right? And then when the economy is in that recession phase of the business cycle, right? So firm will respond to the insufficient demand on the market for their goods and services produced by reducing the output. Right? And if you look at the publication on the Great Depression, for instance, you will see that in 1933, during the Great Depression, unemployment fell by 25%, right? That is an example of cyclical unemployment. So full employment doesn't mean zero unemployment, since we already defined the first two as something that somehow desirable. It's desirable for the economy, because we want people to move from job to job. We want people to get more skills to be able to get more productive a job and earn more income. So a full employment does not mean that there's zero unemployment, right? What it just means is that the cyclical unemployment is zero. So the full unemployment rate is equal to the frictional and the structural unemployment, because those two types of unemployment gonna happen to the economy. The first two types, the frictional and the structural, those type of unemployment are natural part of the economy. So the full employment rate of unemployment is also referred to as the natural rate of unemployment, right? NUR, right? So the natural rate of unemployment is achieved when labor market are in balance, right? The number of a job seeker is in sync with the number of a job vacancy in the economy. So the GDP gap here is defined as a difference between the potential and actual GDP, right? When the potential GDP reflects the level of output associated with the natural rate of unemployment. And economists, Ato Okum, quantify the relationship between unemployment and the GDP. So what you refer to as Okun law say that for every 1%, unemployment rate above the natural rate of unemployment, negative GDP gap of 2% happen to the economy, right? So any 1% above the natural rate of unemployment would generate a negative GDP gap of 2%. So think about it, if your GDP in the trillion, 2% is a big number, right? So that will alert the policymaker to do something about increasing unemployment rate, because that's a missed opportunity, or the opportunity cost is 2%, which is a big number when we talk about a GDP of a country like the United States. So these figures show the actual and potential real GDP and the unemployment rate from 1995 to 2015. And you can see the gap between the GDP, potential GDP being the red curve, and actual GDP be the blue one. You can see the GDP gap, which is the differential between the two curves. A negative GDP gap, a measure output the economy sacrifice when actual GDP fall below the potential GDP, right? And a positive GDP gap indicate when the actual GDP is above potential GDP, right? And that you will see a higher, right, unemployment rate will mean a larger GDP gap going to be negative, and lower unemployment rate mean a smaller or even a positive GDP gap. So the impact of unemployment to the economy. So you see that there's an equal burden of unemployment, right? So if you look at the data that I'm going to show you in the subsequent slide, you will see that unemployment affect more teenagers, right? And affect more teenager than adult worker, right? Affect more blue collar worker than white collar, and also have a ratio impact as well. So if you refer to the table, you will see that civilian, this is a civilian work force data for people of 16 years old and older. And as you can see, the overall unemployment rate was 4.6 in 2007, it jumped to 9.3, 2009, and dropped again to 4.1 pre-recession in 2018. Right. And you can see there's values or a significant gap on the rate, significant gap in the rate between the categories, right? Occupation, age, ratio, gender, education level, and they impact the duration of it. So now some of the non-economic causes of unemployment, right? Severe unemployment always have a social implication, right? On an individual level, and also on throughout the entire society or the economy as a whole. Here are some of them: family disintegration, plummeting moral. People don't have, and all these things will create eventually health issue, and you will see that there's a high number of suicide, homicide, heart attack, mental illness, and all these things can lead to uprise in the society. As for political change, we see some of the emerging economy. So now the third concept we're going to cover is inflation. And what is inflation? We already defined inflation as the rise, the overall rise of the price level in the market. So not all prices rise at the same time, right, in the market. Some prices may stay the same, while all that will fall or increase, right? The reduce of purchasing power, right? The decrease in purchasing power mean that each dollar that you spend today will buy less item than the same dollar you spend before the inflation. So the CPI, which is a consumer price index, measure the inflation. So they have different type of a CPI that the BLS publish. The CPIU, right? That's the most used, most reported. And the CPIU is just the CPI for urban consumer, right? So you will see some publications, CPIC, PPI, which is we will have the consumer price index. You have also the producer price index also. So the calculation of a CPI, you take the price of the most recent basket, right, for a particular year, and you divide it by the same, the price of the same basket in a base year that you define. Here the price, the calculation is based on the price prevailing in 1982 to 1984. And you multiply it by 100 because it's a percentage. So this figure shows you the inflation rate in the United States from 1960 to 2018. In this global perspective, you can see that inflation rate for 5 different countries. And United States generally have a higher inflation rate compared to other countries. Now, the type of inflation, we have the demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. And the demand pull inflation is the result of a spending increase faster than the supply in a particular economy. It's also referred to as when too much money or too much spending chasing a few good in the economy. While the cost push inflation happen when there's a rise in the price level because of the rise of the per unit production cost, right, of the input used to produce the output. Okay, so in cost push inflation, price rise because of output falls, since the cost, the unit cost is increasing. Businesses will tend to reduce the output produced, right? Note here that it's difficult to make a distinction between the cause of inflation. Right? The cost push inflation will eventually die down with a recession. Will die down with a recession. The BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, also report the core inflation, right? Or the core CPI. The core CPI exclude product or goods such as food and energy, because those goods are very volatile. So policymakers mainly interest whether the core inflation is rising, if it's so, how quickly, right? So they can put a policy in place to halt that inflation. So the nominal income is the number of dollar received, right? Wages, rent, profit, and interest. The real income refer to the purchasing power of your income. What can you purchase with that income received? Okay. And to that point, you can see that your real income can decrease even with an increase in nominal income, right? So if the inflation rate is higher than the increase in nominal income, so if the inflation on the market is higher than the increase in your nominal income, that will impact your real income. So basically, you will have money, but you cannot purchase what you used to, the quantity you used to purchase before. Who is hurt by inflation, right? So when the inflation is unanticipated, that is it will impact people. But if you anticipate it, you probably will be prepared for it. Right? You will take that rate of inflation into your calculation. So when inflation is expected, people plan ahead, right? And they expect the inflation may be able to adjust the activity or work spending to avoid the effect of that inflation because you anticipate it. But if unanticipated inflation, it have a strong impact, right? So you see, if a fixed income group will be hurt because the real income will suffer, right? if you're on the fixed income. Saver, if you save money, will be also hurt by unanticipated income, unanticipated inflation, because of interest rate may not cover the cost of inflation. So there will be the value of your saving depleted, right? And those savings gonna lose purchasing power. The creditor, right, can be harmed by unanticipated inflation as well, right? Interest on payment received may be less than inflation rate, right? So loan payment will have a less purchasing power for the lender, right? If they did not take that inflation into consideration. People who are unaffected by inflation. So if inflation is anticipated, people prepare for, right? The COLA stands for cost of life adjustment. And when inflation is anticipated, the effect is less severe, right? Because of there's a cost of living adjustment can be built into the interest rate and everything to adjust for the inflation. Okay. So the union I have over here, the union Social Security recipient will have the cost of living adjusted. Union member usually anticipate inflation and build it into the annual increase of the members. So here the debtor, right, a borrower can be a help, right, can be helped because interest payment may be less than inflation rate, right? So borrower receive dear dollar and are paying back cheap dollar type of concept. Real interest rate is adjusted of inflation, and the nominal interest rate is the amount. It's the interest rate not adjusted of inflation. So we have inflation premium, which is the amount that interest rate is raised to cover the effect of anticipated inflation, right? And the real interest rate here is defined as the nominal interest rate minus the inflation premium, like you can see in this figure, right? So the nominal interest rate include the real interest rate and the inflation premium. So your real interest rate will be your nominal interest rate minus the inflation premium. In the past, deflation has been much a problem as inflation. For example, the 1930 depression was a period of decline, crisis, and wage. The effect of deflation are the reverse of those of inflation. How inflation affect output? Cost push inflation, where resources price unexpectedly jump or peak, could cause above output and employment to decline. To that point, the real income will fall. Mild inflation, less than 3%, has a uncertain effect on the economy. In some, that's why you see that the Fed usually have a tolerance level of inflation. Anything less than 3% is not alarming, right? People just monitor, the economists just monitor that type of inflation without Fed or policymaker take any necessary action. Hyperinflation, right? The impact of hyperinflation. Here, hyperinflation is defined as inflation of more than 50% per month, right? And that which is translate to an effective rate of over 13,000% per year. And we see the history shows some of those hyperinflation, right? And we saw it in Germany after World War I, and in Japan also after World War II, and to what we saw in Venezuela. And hyperinflation to be caused by government expansion of money supply, right? Which is typically a bad decision. If you create more money than what economy needed, a bad decision that may cause hyperinflation, right? And the hyperinflation will continue until the monetary authority cut the spending, right? Policy authority, government cut the spending to start reducing money out of the economy. And most episodes of hyperinflation tend to be short in duration, right? Except there's some cases, Greece in 1940 and Nicaragua in 1980, right? And those both hyperinflation lasts over 4 years. But in general, it tend to have a shorter duration compared to inflation. So the last word of the chapter, it just point out the challenge that the labor market is going through these days, when there's a great shortage in skilled worker, right? So and one of the most important factor that we saw in this shortage is the skill mismatch. When the skill of the job seeker do not match the skill needed for the job open. And some of these are due to the fact that there's a decline in vocational education at a high level, when the school system is kind of eliminate those programs to be more into the academic program for the student at that level. But as a all skill worker retire and drop from the workforce, employer need those type of worker, and if they are not getting it because there's a reduction in those programs in high school level, so that will create a challenge. And to the point that many businesses have started their own program, training program, to increase available worker. Other issue related to that also is the demographic and geographic issues, right? As a job open and dispersed equally across the country, and workers seem to be less willing to move to where the job are. And finally, one of the causes that we have over here is related to unrealistic expectation for employer, right? Also rolling into to create that disparity between the job seeker and the number of job available.